So a fundamental part of every Assassin's Creed game is its combat system. Over the years we've seen a lot of different takes on the series combat, some better than others, so today I'm going to rank them from worst to best, in my opinion of course. You guys are bound to disagree and that is totally fine, but you know what isn't fine? Your online security being compromised. That we just cannot have, and that's why today's video is kindly sponsored by NordVPN. And this was a sponsorship I took because I've been using NordVPN for a good few months now, and it's a great service, both in terms of internet security and also just getting all these perks of having an encrypted IP. What Nord does is gives you a virtual private network, connecting you to another network that can be about anywhere you want it to be, which is a pretty good idea if you use public Wi-Fi and don't want those pesky Templars stealing your valuable data. It can also get past region-locked content online. For example, if you want to watch something on a streaming service that's available exclusively in another country, let's say the Assassin's Creed movie. Actually, you know what, let's not say that. I should really stop trying to link this to AC, Jesus Christ. Basically, Nord gives you access to otherwise region-locked content in 59 countries with over 5,000 servers. And most importantly, it's very useful for gaming. Your bandwidth isn't just going to throttle midway through a game of Artifact Assault with the boys, as it would with most ISPs. And on top of all of that, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee if you're not quite pleased. Now that is a steal, and it's been massively useful in my own experience, genuinely. And if you guys do want to get NordVPN, you can use coupon code Walshie or the links in the description and pinned comment for a 2-year plan at 68% off with an additional 4 months free as a part of this year's Christmas deal. Thanks again to NordVPN, and I hope you guys enjoy the video. Syndicate's combat system is far and away my least favourite in the series. It's spongy, repetitive, and lacks any kind of variety. While we've had other systems in the series where I would regard the enemies as spongy, at least in the later games after Syndicate you have more options, and as soon as you have enemy attack patterns memorised, it runs like clockwork. And having predictable enemies isn't inherently terrible, but what makes an AC Brotherhood or even Odyssey better is that you have these options that kick just a little bit of life into things. You might know the easiest or quickest way to kill a group of guards, but what's fun is using all the tools you have at your disposal to make it interesting instead of simply going for the easiest option. But Syndicate has none of that
intrinsic motivation.
There's no taunts, disarms, heavy attacks, none of that. All you have is attack and break defense. And so you'll get this process of spamming X and pressing A every now and then, and getting this display of pre-Watershed cartoon violence that is just a few stock sound effects away from being a fucking Tom and Jerry fight scene. You're quick, but you're totally weightless. You feel zero impact, and seeing Jacob or Evie zip about the screen is just comical. You have cookery knives, canes, and knuckle dusters, you know, England, and it, which aren't weapons you'd want from an AC game anyway, but there's no difference in how they play outside of animations. It's Arkham combat, but like if you played as the Riddler, it is the most goofy, over-the-top shit, and I don't enjoy it. So number 9 is Odyssey, and my opinions on this combat system haven't changed whatsoever. An RPG should excel in making you feel like your character in every facet, especially combat in a game like this. In Odyssey, you're an exceptionally skilled mercenary wielding a spear that can do pretty much anything. Yet here you are, tearing vital organs to shreds in a comically over-the-top manner, only to have enemies shrug it off as if it's a paper cup. Unless you wanted to buy some Helix credits, maybe some XP boosters. You know, I know you've shelled out $60 on this game and are on the brink of losing your sanity already, but Ubisoft, multi-billion-dollar corporation Ubisoft, want just a few more dollars, you know, to make this awful combat system slightly more tolerable. Superhuman abilities do not belong in Assassin's Creed. Having Pieces of Eden, that makes sense in the context of this universe. Have the Isu, that's cool, but don't have this spear, this piece of Eden that exists solely as an excuse to give you these godlike abilities, only to make you totally powerless to push microtransactions and needless grinding. It's awfully tedious, and every time I speak about Odyssey's combat system, I just get told I'm using the wrong build. That shouldn't be an issue anyway. An RPG, one focused this much on choice no less, shouldn't excuse having dire combat just because you don't have the right build. There shouldn't be a right build. But I indulged anyway, put everything into the warrior tree on my latest replay, and all this footage you've seen is me doing an additional 40% warrior damage, and it is still mind-bogglingly tedious. It's a game where enemies don't feel like genuine adversaries, but like chores, and the majority of deaths in this game, or any kind of difficulty, can usually be chalked down to these silly numbers and statistics that don't belong and are simply boring. It's not good, it's weightless, it's boring, and very pessimistically geared to push microtransactions. It's utterly awful. Now, Origin's combat system is one my thoughts have changed on a lot since last replaying it. A lot of people outright hate it. I don't necessarily love it, but I'd say it's far better than Odyssey and Syndicate. Barring Unity, Origins is the first game in the series where it feels like going up against a huge group of guards is actually something dangerous that's going to have consequence. In AC2, Brotherhood, 4, Syndicate, pretty much every game before it, fighting a bigger group of enemies usually meant a longer fight rather than a more difficult one, and I appreciate that Origins actually makes big groups of enemies intimidating rather than tedious, or solely tedious I should say. As much as I enjoyed Brotherhood's combat system, it's not one that makes me feel like I need to use stealth and be as cautious as an assassin would. It's something I do out of want rather than need, and that's not the case here, which is something I do like, and I feel as if the combat system in Origins has more weight to it than both Valhalla and Odyssey, which does make it a bit more satisfying to use. I don't think the combat system is necessarily irredeemably bad like a lot of people think. It's just not really what I look for from an Assassin's Creed combat system. It works fine as its own thing, but you've not got much in the way of any finesse or speed, nor can you tear through guards as an assassin would, but it's just sort of fine. So Valhalla's combat system suffers from a lot of the same issues as Origins and Odyssey, but there's definitely some improvements there. Combat feels far less number oriented for one. I played the majority of the game with the same setup and I was fine, and dying in Valhalla typically feels like it was my fault, like it was because I wasn't good enough instead of the little number next to my weapon not being high enough. Skill points are a thing, but so long as you aren't majorly over leveled by like 60 or more levels, you're fine really. And you're given much more slack there, and you don't have a system that's entirely dictated by trivial numbers. With that said, it's definitely not without flaw. Valhalla's system is very light, your dodges go very wide, and from my experience, the lighter and quicker your setup, the higher your damage output is, often ending up in you moving weightlessly and not really getting much feedback. It's nowhere near as hard hitting or visceral as we were told it would be even with heavier weapons, and combat sort of just feels like the means to an end rather than something fun in and of itself. The reason I've placed it above Origins is because I feel more encouraged to change things up a bit. Origins has a few enemy archetypes, but a well-timed dodge followed by a flurry of hits usually does the job, and that is the case with Valhalla, sure, but there's so many more ways to go about killing an enemy. You can stun them with a well-placed arrow shot, destroy their shield, or use any manner of abilities and weapon combinations you think would work given the archetype, and there is a ton of enemy archetypes. I don't like hitbox-based combat, but I really like having options and freedom when it comes to combat encounters, and Valhalla definitely gives you that. The problem is that you feel incredibly light and aren't really given that much feedback, which can make combat feel kinda tedious. The combat system used in Assassin's Creed 4 and Rogue is probably the most here nor there combat system in the series. It works, and enemies aren't these boring, near-immortal tanks, but what you're left with is sort of an unengaging and flat system with little in the way of any sort of variety. With the exception of captains, you can break the defense of every enemy, leaving them open to a killing blow. You don't really get much pushback from guards, and it's very easy to just sort of switch off with this combat system. Unlike AC3, which uses the same engine and a very similar combat system, you don't have much in the way of weight or general feedback. You just have a lot of speed, but not with the impact of a Brotherhood or Revelation system, and you really don't have too many options in either of these games. Something that I like a lot in older AC titles is gradually learning skills and unlocking new weapons and tools to make combat more interesting. AC1 did it back in 2007, and Valhalla definitely does it with the sheer amount of options you have, but I can't say I know the difference between any of the weapons in Rogue and Black Flag. The game tells you one weapon set is better than another, but I don't feel it. You experience all the depth that the system has to offer in that very first fight, and while it's not frustrating or tedious, it is boring, and for a game where you do so much boarding and a stealthy approach isn't an option in a lot of those circumstances, it's one of Black Flag's major issues. What makes AC3's combat system more enjoyable than 4's is its weight and the variety of guard archetypes. Instead of having the break defense ability basically leave any enemy open to a killing blow, you need to use different methods for different archetypes, and generally you'll get more pushback from enemies. It's still fairly easy, but because of the archetypes and the fact there's not like a catch-all method for them, it's not as repetitious as Black Flag. A big downside of this system is that enemies don't have any kind of health. You need to hit them a few times consecutively to actually kill them. And so you'll often hit a guard a few times, and then if you get hit or that gets disrupted, you need to start again. But I do like this system. It has some flashiness and some weight to it, and it does what it needs to do. So number 4 is AC2, which builds off of AC1's combat system in a lot of ways for the better, but ranks below that system because once you know the archetypes in AC2, you're not going to face as much resistance as you would in AC1. And you're not put in these situations where you really get punished for making missteps and need to recover. You can get countered, but it's sort of a minor inconvenience, and that's it. If it had that element of risk that really keeps you on your feet in AC1, it would be higher, but as is, I do still like this combat system. One of the things that I liked more in AC2 than AC1 is the weapon and ability variety, and the different animations that different weapons open up. You've also got a fair bit of mobility here as well, with the ability to strafe. You're also able to taunt, disarm, throw dirt, and you can actually use the hidden blade offensively now instead of just waiting for counters, but that counter window is more generous. Also, combos are back, which is great. Point is, you have a lot of options, and I like that. But the issue is it's far more predictable and less punishing, which is the system's downfall, but it is still good. So number 3 is probably going to be one of the more controversial picks on this list, but it's Assassin's Creed Unity. Unity was on the verge of being something really special when it came to combat, and the big drawback of Unity's combat system is its input lag, which can make it feel kinda sluggish. There can be these big, long gaps between pressing a button and having Arno actually execute that command. But I wouldn't say it's as bad as it's made out to be, but it is still an issue, and a big one at that. And if that slight sluggishness wasn't there, Unity would be the smoothest combat system in the series. The way that Arno moves from animation to animation looks really nice, and makes for a system that feels far less linear than the combat that came before it. You don't have these instant counters that can last for a good few seconds anymore, instead you just have normal parrying, and for that, combat does feel really smooth and seamless, but quite slow, and that's another big issue with the system, is its pace. It is probably the flashiest system we've had, but unlike the parkour, that doesn't come at the expense of any sort of functionality. There's also a fair bit of variety in there, with all the different weapon types and enemy archetypes that each require different strategies. The only two big issues are, again, it's a little slow out of what I'd want from an AC combat system. It feels much more like you're an above average swordsman rather than a skilled assassin, which, while still fun, is an issue, and guards can shoot you from miles away, and that gets really annoying. But just having these encounters between 3 or 4 guards can be really cinematic while still being genuinely engaging. It's like a lot of Unity where it is just far better in concept. Without the input lag and the magic rifleman, if it was actually finished, it could be considerably better. But as is, you have a system that is flashy, engaging with genuine difficulty, and one that offers you a fair few options. It's just nowhere near as tight in terms of responsiveness as pretty much any game in the series, and that is a huge issue, its biggest issue, but I do think it's good on the whole. Please don't fucking lynch me. Number 2 is the Assassin's Creed 1 combat system. I replayed AC1 a few months ago for the first time in a long time, like a year or two, and replaying the game made me remember just how much I love this combat system. The last time I did one of these, I think I put AC1 at 5th or something like that, which I feel is far too low. It's far and away the most unappreciated in the series, and overall is very solid, and the one big thing that I'd say AC2 doesn't improve. It doesn't have a lot of the flashiness or brutality as some of the systems since that I know a lot of people do really like, but it's got a lot of depth to it and a genuine learning curve. Getting used to combos, timing heavy attacks, and things like that are really satisfying, because you can't get away with just mindlessly swinging because you'll get countered and stunned, and you will take huge amounts of damage for that. And for its difficulty and the way combos work, it's really engaging, and tearing through huge groups of guards does feel really satisfying because of the difficulty and that learning curve, unlike an AC4. And you really can get this really nice rhythm going that feels great. It feels the most real out of all of these systems, and I don't play these games for realism, of course, but it strikes a nice balance between a system that feels visceral and impactful, whilst also making you feel like a badass assassin without holding your hand. Enemies aren't going to get hit 1,000 times and just be fine with that, and they'll stun you. They'll give you a genuine challenge. And while I do prefer the next pick, AC1 feels like a perfect balance between a system that looks and feels good. It's challenging and it's unpredictable. There's no glaring flaws with this system, as I would say there is with every other system in the series, and it's one that I absolutely never get tired of. So number 1 is the system introduced in Brotherhood and also used in Revelations. Slightly worse in Revelations on account of the unnecessary slow-mo breaking its pace, but I still love this system. Its two big flaws are that it's not as engaging as it should be, and it's too easy for stealth to really be encouraged. As I mentioned earlier, AC1 is a really nice compromise where you have a system that's difficult, not artificially difficult like an Origins or Odyssey, but genuinely engaging, but difficult enough where it's not always the best option, while still being fun. And while that flaw is there, Brotherhood and Revelations are the two best systems at really immersing you into being an assassin, and that's the most important thing to me. I've gone on about how much I love this system so many times because it's truly amazing. You don't have an Odyssey situation where the combat is drawn out for the sake of it. You are a master assassin in his prime, and you cut through enemies with the style and speed of such a man. And tying together these kill streaks with your throwing knives or hidden gun is really satisfying. My two big issues with the system that I mentioned before stem from it being too easy. A system like this with a significantly smaller health bar and enemies who will stun you, like in AC1, would be near perfect. When it comes to being an assassin in combat, I want high damage output at a fast pace, which you have, but I don't want to be able to take a lot of damage in return. It doesn't make sense for this nimble assassin to be able to eat as much damage as you do, and that's the main issue here. And that does say a lot, that there isn't an AC that's ever had a combat system that is truly flawless and in the top tier, and there's usually some big flaw that sticks out. But hey, hopefully the next gen game will give us something good on a new engine. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, maybe leave a like, and if you didn't, maybe let me know why. Be sure to check out Nord in the link in the description. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all next time.